Yo, what's up? Hi, hello, everybody. How are you doing? So you want to play DK in the War Within? That's fantastic. A lot of us do. It looks really, really fun. This video is going to be perfect for people coming over to the class for the first time, this new expansion, or people who are just lost and confused with all the crazy class changes and class rework, and they just want some direction going into War Within on their Death Knight. There's going to be a lot of questions answered in this, so go to the timestamps down below and check out if your question is answered. If not, please leave a comment down below so I can possibly make a part 2 of this thing if there's enough interest in that. But let's dive right into it. I speed ran the intro this time. So we're going to start off with races, and please Google search Wowhead racial guide or something similar, so you can have the background information. There's a lot of information to cover, and I can't be spending the entire time going through every bullet point in just one section, or we're going to be here for an hour. So you got to have some background knowledge. Pull that up, pause the video, stay with me. I'm going to be going fast. There are certain races with positive synergy on DK. There are certain races with neutral synergy, and there's actually certain races with counter synergy where their effect kind of overlaps with the DK effect, and it's just not good. I'll be going through each one and telling you where it fits and if we should play it. So, starting off the top left, we got Human, and Human has good synergy with DK's toolkit. Human brings a special trinket that doesn't get you out of all CC, it only gets you out of stuns, and it shares a cooldown with the standard equipable trinket that gets you out of all CC. So that is a huge opportunity cost, but DK has a special trick up their sleeve where they have a massive anti-CC toolkit baked directly into their class. They have Icebound Fortitude that gets them out of stuns and makes them immune to future stuns during the duration. Then they have Lichborn, which does the exact same thing, but with Fear, Charm, and Sleep. That's Lock Fear, Priest Fear, Succubus Sleep, Sleepwalk, and lots of other things. And also what Lichborn can do is immune incoming polymorphs and hexes, because those spells and spells like them require a humanoid target. But when you use Lichborn, Lichborn makes you an undead, and now you're no longer classified as a humanoid target, which means the incoming polymorph will literally just fail as long as you press it beforehand, not when you're in the polymorph already. Then you have Anti-Magic Shell, which can also be used on incoming CC, like Cyclone and Hammer of Justice, and prevent the CC from affecting you in the first place. Again, it can't be used while you're already in that CC. And then we have a lot of immunities to things like slows, and we even have a root break now. So our anti-CC toolkit and immunities are absolutely massive, which means we could put on 2 DPS trinkets, 2 trinkets, equipable trinkets that make you do more damage and don't get you out of CC, and then just use our toolkit and the Human trinket. Never have to worry about that shared cooldown thing because we're not wearing a CC trinket in the first place. And this makes Human very, very good in situations where you just want as much output and pressure and driving a win condition as possible, like Solo Shuffle and Battleground Blitz, where instead of it being perfectly synergized gameplay between 3 people on comms, you are in a more hectic PvE-ish environment where you're just trying to contribute as much and as fast as possible. Now, you might not be able to trinket a Cyclone, right? Or a blind, because those are not stuns. But if the blind is on you and not your healer, that's a good thing. And if you're in a Cyclone, maybe you could have prevented it with multiple grips, kick, or AMS. So as a result, Human has a fantastic synergistic racial with DK. Okay, now we go down the list. Void Elf, nothing really there. This is just neutral. You've got a movement speed, movement port rather, but it is pretty clunky, and this is more of a caster racial. Dwarf is actually outshined by the other Dwarf racial. What this does is remove a lot of disrupting, damaging negative effects on you, like bleeds and magical effects and poisons with the ability Stone Form. And then it puts your trinket on a cooldown, actually, because it also gets rid of silences. So people were using it as a free silence break. So they shared it with cooldown with your trinket. Thus, it's not very good. You have a 10% damage reduction in addition to that, but the other one gives you much better benefits, and we'll get to that in a second. So Dwarf could actually be good because bleeds are a huge weakness for us, and Feral has them, and BM has them, and Warrior has them, and Assassination Rogues have them. But Dark Iron Dwarf is actually just a better version. We'll talk about that very soon. Lightforged, nothing there. I'd say this has maybe counter synergy with every class in the game, so this would be a definite no, because part of its racial is nerfed in PvP, and the other part only happens when you die, and I don't think you really want dying to be a win condition in PvP. Okay, we're going on to Night Elf now. Night Elf Fairly neutral, maybe even bad. Night Elf Shadow Meld pairs really well, of course, with stealth classes or things that need to get rid of one incoming effect that's very scary. Kind of, it puts you in a state where you cannot be affected by things for a brief moment. This is not quite again as good for DK because we have so many stops for high octane spells as it is, right? So giving us one more is kind of just overlapping with something we already shine in and giving us no other benefit. So maybe tiny bit of counter synergy there for Night Elf DK. Okay, finally we get on to Dark Iron Dwarf. Now, this version of Dwarf still gets rid of those bleeds, still gets rid of those poisons, and immunes all of them, right? It just removes them effectively, clears them all, and then converts it all to power. Not a damage reduction this time, but damage increase. So it comes in the form of primary stat, and a lot of it. And DK really loves primary stat because we actually have a bunch of primary stat mods. So Dark Iron Dwarf is high risk, high reward, in that it'll still put you in a disadvantaged state when it puts your trinket on cooldown. But it gives you so much cleanse and power that if used properly against Feral Go or Assassination Rogue Go, you can completely thwart their go and turn it into your own go. And DK can always do damage. Both specs right now have a huge amount of sustained pressure. So you can use this at any time, even if you're not directly during every single offensive cooldown. If you get a huge chunk of primary stat, again, you can turn their go into your go. So Dark Iron Dwarf, just better than Dwarf, and another good synergy with DK. Gnome has slight synergy with DK. We used to really demand the Root Break. Now we have pretty accessible Wraithwalk and even Death Charger if you're running Rider of the Apocalypse. So our mobility isn't very bad, and our anti-mobility is fantastic. So having one more mobility button does not feel as good as some of the other options right now. So Gnome is kind of just like, sure, you have a Root Break. DK is like getting out of roots. So if you really want one, you've got one. Cold Turan, probably super negative. A knockback stun puts them on stun DR, which Unholy I guess wouldn't hate, but Frost would be so miserable with. And it also knocks them away, which if you know DK's toolkit, Death Grip, A-Bomb limb pulling them, right? AoE abilities pulling them in and doing a bunch of AoE damage and disruption. You know, the last thing you would probably want to do is then knock them out of it. Now, of course, there's always going to be situations where you can find some use in this. But we're talking very general. And almost all the time, it is a net negative to press this button, putting them on your stun DR before your Frost Go and kicking them away from you, which is what you're trying to do. You're trying to pull them into you. So Cold Turan, negative synergy. Draenei is neutral, but it's a really limited neutral. It has a heal that you can use on yourself or other people as the main benefit here. We don't really care too much about that. I mean, it exists, you know, healing is healing, but it's not like it has positive synergy with our toolkit, though Mechanome actually has some. Mechanome has a primary stat mod, which, like I said, primary stat plus DK, having Fallen Crusader and Pillar of Frost and all of these tools for utilizing primary stat modifiers. Mechanome also has a cheat death mechanic, which should scale with your stamina. And we have a lot of stamina as DK from things like your Veteran of the Third War and then Stoneskin Gargoyle if you're running it. So all of those things actually are a fine general toolkit for DK. You got a little bit of extra damage on use, and then you've got a nice survivability token giving you one more life per chance. And that would actually synergize well with Blood Draw, the DK talent. Feel free to go into the talent calculator and look that up. Or Will of the Forsaken, which gives you a little bit more survivability at low health, helping you rebound and Death Strike back up and save yourself a go. So Mechanome, actually very good. Worgen, not so much at all, maybe even a little bit of negative synergy. I wouldn't say a sprint is negative synergy with DK because we could use the sprint, but it can be immediately reslowed and it just is bad. I think Worgen is just bad in PvP. It's literally just bad, so it would be just bad for DK as well. Pandaren used to be the absolute go-to for Frost because it gave you an off DR, so what that means is a CC effect that is not a stun, so you could stop them from being able to move and then grip them in and then grip the other person in while they're still in the panda racial, which is like a little incap. It's like a paralyzation thing that pandas do. I don't know. It's something. It's an incap. That's what it is. And then because the one was gripped on the para, they can't move, and the other one is gripped at the very end and then gets immediately blinded. Now you've got that perfect three-man go. This is way less important because now DK can play other comps. So Pandaren still has an off DR CC, which is fantastic, but it is not literally required for the Frost DK Go to be as pristine as possible. So good, not fantastic, but still available. Okay, now we're over to the Horde side. Didn't skip anything there, right? Nope, did not. Okay, Orc, just traditionally a very, very good race for PvP always. It gives you a big damage mod in Blood Fury, which you can just macro to Pillar or Dark Transformation and just always have it when it's up. And it gives you stun reduction, which if you know anything about PvP, stuns are of the most importance to reduce as much as you can. So being able to get out of them more often, or rather quicker, is a much better way of saying that, is very useful. Now DK, of course, as I said, already has a stun immunity, but being able to sit one stun and then trinket something like a clone or a polymorph or a blind or anything else is really nice, because then you can use that trinket to peel for your teammates if you're not possibly the target. So like a multiple cheap shot chain from a sub-rogue is all reduced very heavily from Orc Racial. It's just very good and very reliable in a PvP setting. So good for DK. Nightborn, nothing really to say about this. It's trash. Okay. Undead, actually heavy counter synergy rather with DK. Heavy counter synergy. What it has is a fear break that puts your trinket on cooldown, but we already have a fear break that's better, doesn't put your trinket on cooldown and immunes future fears, and Lichborn with a long duration and short cooldown that can be even shorter from hero talent. So Undead, absolute avoid. Wow, this is horrible. Just so terrible. You would never play Undead DK. High Mountain Tauren, pretty bad. A charge stun is really high to get value out of. Remember, we want to grip, blind everything, and then stun them. We don't really want to be charging through them and then having to get back. Charge stun is just very unique in that I don't know what class can benefit well from it, but it's certainly not DK. So this race and the last two races, all just not good for DK. Now, here's a different type of stun, where instead of flinging yourself off and stunning through them as you charge, you can actually just stun in your location. This is the race actually that I use a lot of the time, because early in an expansion, you can get a lot of value out of the stam buff that Tauren provides, because DK loves stam and you have a lot more self-sustain, which allows you to stay in better. Then you have an alternating value from Frost and Unholy. Frost really gets value out of the crit damage that Tauren brings, because all of your obliterates crit, while Unholy really gets value out of War Stomp because it doesn't have any AoE stuns on its own. So, but it does have AoE benefiting effects, like all of its disease from an AoE, and then cleaving strikes from D&D, and then AoE scored striking over and over while bursting sores on everybody, and then bursting sores is AoE, right? That's all really good AoE value. And with all the D&D mods that we have in the new hero talents, putting a D&D on the ground and having them stunned in it is so great, but we actually have no way as Unholy to do that ourselves. We can grip blind, but then follow it up with nothing. So grip blind War Stomp, or rather grip blind D&D down while the blind is not broken yet, then War Stomp allows you immediately after the War Stomp to start scored striking instantly, and the D&D is already down because you put it in the blind, and you can just AoE damage everybody to nuclear AoE burst from a go that you were able to set up by yourself with this racial, literally because of this racial. And then when they come out of the War Stomp, which nobody trinkets a War Stomp, let's be real, it's a short stun, they are actually going to have the slow from the blind still on them. So it's even a little harder. They're taking so much damage in the War Stomp, they're like, I can't trinket this. And then they want to get out of this whole mess, but they're slowed from the blind from the 50% slow on it. So, yeah. And then Frost can use it as like a setup to a go where you grip blind War Stomp, grip blind D&D War Stomp, and then the Remorseless Winter Stun comes in half for 2 pseudo interrupts rather than 1, or you can just use it as pseudo after the go ends on Aura Masteries from healers. There's just so many little unique tools that you're given by having an on-demand instant AoE stun like that. So DK really likes that. This is my choice, but absolutely all the other ones that I've said are good, are fantastic. And just because I personally like this one does not mean any of those are less good. Okay, the other orc is just worse than the regular orc, so do not run this orc. Troll is interesting in that it has both fantastic synergy and counter synergy at the same time. So one of its passive, the Voodoo Shuffle, I think it's called the Voodoo Shuffle, is a slow repellent, but we already have that through Def's advanced passive, so it's actually just totally not needed. But the haste on use is really impactful because we have a lot less haste going into the new expansion with less secondary stats, and we could really use the haste for all of the incredibly impactful globals that we want to put in our opener. So Berserking the Troll Racial that gives you haste, fantastic. Voodoo Shuffle, completely worthless. You can choose it if you feel like you're super sluggish and you just feel like trying something new, because I don't think a lot of people run Troll. But you can't argue that haste is good for DK, because it is. The other version of Troll is just not good, so I'm going to move right past that one. Blood Elf is okay. Having a Purge is actually pretty nice. You can purge things like NS on an R-Druid, especially if you're training them and all of a sudden they felt like they had an answer and now they don't. You can also purge Bops for you and your teammate. You don't really need Bop off because you have so many sources of magical damage and your kick goes through Bop, but it can't help a teammate, and we will be playing with Windwalkers and Warriors this expansion, so you know that's pretty impactful to be able to purge Bop for them. Volpura is awful. Okay, moving on. Goblin is also awful. It gives you the worst version of a mobility button. I just don't ever see any situation where you would take this. There's Pandaren again, and we're done. So, a quick recap. A too long didn't read for anybody who didn't want to sit through that. That was a speed run of every race in the game. Human is good. Dark Iron Dwarf is good. Mechanome is actually good. Pandaren is good. Gnome is fine. Troll has a very good side and a very bad side. Orc is great. Or good to keep it in line with all the other ones. And then Tauren is good. And then, everything else you can go back. They're varied from neutral to absolutely horrendous. Like Nightborn. What is that? Okay. So that is races. All right. So the next thing on my agenda is Unholy versus Frost. So now let me get into my character and keep the video going. So Unholy versus Frost is an unanswerable question, and every time I get to this point in the new expansion where I'm trying to answer this question for everybody on my stream or in my YouTube comments, I always kind of go through all the strengths and weaknesses and then try and make a grand conclusion, but the whole time I'm thinking, you know, there's a very loud disclaimer here, which is, yeah, but we don't know. Because you have to try out all of the various comps they can play, all of the solo shuffle experiences that can happen, all of the new things that can happen in Battleground Blitz, thousands of games with thousands of experimentation and all against the best players in order to know which one is good and which one is bad. That's just how it works, right? Or if they're both good, it makes it even harder because then you have to see, well, which one is slightly more good, right? So that is very, very difficult. So instead of saying an answer to that question, Unholy versus Frost, and just saying, well, I think blank is going to be better, and then knowing the whole time that I'm lying, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to show you all of the situations one is good, what it needs to excel, and what it brings to the table. And then I'm going to do the same for the other. I'm going to talk about potential comps that they would love to play and their profile and their win conditions, their damage profile and their win conditions to help you get a feel for which one you may enjoy more, knowing the whole time that there is no locked-in answer for which one is going to be better in War Within, but at least now you'll have all of this information that distinguishes the two specs for you. So that is what I mean when I say Unholy versus Frost. So Unholy, well, actually, let's start with Frost because I just swapped to it. So Frost benefited from the Frost rework in a big way. For the first time, and I've maybe been asking for this for six years. I think it was 6 years. We should have a damage profile that gives you sustained goes, sustained damage in between goes, more agency to stay in with survivability and impactful globals that allow us to play more like a Ret Paladin. I've been talking about how the Frost rework kind of felt reminiscent of the Ret rework, not in utility. We don't have off heals, we don't have spell bop, we don't have sank. We're not talking utility, we're not talking about class flavor. We're talking about damage profile. What does that mean? It means we have our offensive cooldown is on a very short cooldown, 45 seconds. We also have Strang match up with that, and the new Deathbringer hero talent match up with that. So 45 seconds. It also lasts longer. Instead of being a long cooldown with a short duration, it is a shorter cooldown with a longer duration, meaning we're in Pillar of Frost more often, which means we have access to our win condition more often, right? And that is very hard for people to deal with because if Pillar was such a great button that they had to use a lot of defensives, what if that Pillar lasts longer, is up sooner, and is up sooner? Then they don't have as easy ways to trade their defensives into our pillar because it might be up before their defensives come back up, right? And that's the whole idea. These small changes, as in reducing it by 15 seconds and extending it by 6 seconds, go a long, long way. So that's what I mean by the Ret damage profile. We have a more access to our big damage, more damage in between our big damage goes, and we even have what Ret got, which is an auto attack package, which even prioritizes staying in even further by giving us extra damage and survivability from staying in, especially if you're running the dual wield variant. Now, Crusading Strikes on your auto attacks from Ret is probably a little better than our dual wield auto attack package, but come the new expansion, will have a ton of haste and a little bit of crit and maybe not nearly as much mastery, which means white damage will be a bigger proportion of our damage, which means you will see this auto attack package start to really reward you staying in with those big compounding auto attacks, 5 stacks of Icy Talents. And staying in to get all these auto attacks will get you Killing Machine procs, which will be off of go, which will give you that big Obliterate hit off of go, right? So all that means is you press Pillar of Frost, you get their cooldowns. It lasts a little longer than they're expecting, and they start panicking and maybe use a few more cooldowns. And they're like, finally, now it's over. Not quite, because you still have some big chunky hits before the next pillar comes out. So you stay aggressive. They're on the back foot. You have more survivability. You stay in. You continue doing damage. Now, they finally get stabilized, just in time for your next pillar to come back up. And they're like, but I don't have anything. And that's what New Frost should play like. So what is that answer about the Frost versus Unholy thing? Well, Frost wants to play with specs that really love instant on-demand damage as part of an instant on-demand go. Windwalker Monk. Windwalker Monk will love that. They got rid of Serenity and now they have double charge Storm, Earth, and Fire again. So instead of doing one all-in go and then running the entire time, they can actually stay in with you, especially with how much pressure you guys are going to be generating together with Immortal Strike and all this AoE damage. They can do their first Storm Earth on your first go, and now all of a sudden 45 seconds later, you have all those things I was talking about with Frost and a second Storm, Earth, and Fire from the Windwalker Monk. Holy cow. Every single one of these goes is going to have Big Fist of Fury, 90% slow, and Rising Sun Kick from Mortal Strike, as well as huge on-demand damage from the Windwalker, because that's what they excel at. So, Windwalker DK, Frost loves to play this. TSG could actually have some of this value, especially if they can run a Spear variant as Warrior. Because what does Spear do? Locks him into one place, benefits from multiple people being on that place at a time. What does DK do? It grips all those people into the big pile for the Spear to activate. So Spear has always been there for Frost to utilize, but unfortunately Frost's design has been so pitiful for the last 6 years that it was never able to properly utilize it at the highest level. Now that might all change, and Frost TSG Spear might end up being very good. I think Fury, spoiler, probably belongs a little bit more with Unholy, but we'll talk about that soon. So now we've talked about Windwalker. We've talked about big, chunky Bladestorm Spear, AoE Colossus Arms goes. I can't get too much into Arms Warrior mechanics in the new expansion because this video is already going to be so long, but there's another thing Frost benefits from, but Frost also benefits with casters who can do the same thing. In Legion, if you played back then, I'm so old, I'm an old man. If you played all the way back in Legion, the end of Legion Season 6, and 7, you had Frost DK Destro Lock as a fantastic comp because Destro had Havoc, which allowed it to bolt 2 targets at the same time. It also had Infernal Stun, which is an off DR stun. That is AoE on the place that they put Infernal down. And it had double coil because it would Havoc, double bolt them, and then double coil them. The crazy thing about Infernal Stun in the Immortal Coil is that they effectively act as stuns, but they don't DR, diminishing returns, with stuns. So Frost DK has Remorseless Winter Stun AoE, Destro Lock has Infernal Stun AoE, and Coil AoE, and then you have a silence out of that. So their toolkits perfectly sync up, where neither of them DR a single thing the other one wants to do, and it's all disrupting multiple people while cleaving multiple people. This comp was insanely good in Legion, but has fallen off because of Frost's design in the last, again, 6 years. But now Frost design looks way better for that as its shorter cooldowns goes. Will help link up with more Havocs, more double coils, and more peels for the Frosty K. And since there's so much more pressure that they can have outside of goes, that means the fact that they're training the Destro the entire time allows the Frosty K to completely tee off. Before, Frosty K could only do damage every minute. So therefore, the Destro Lock getting his head kicked in by double melee, it didn't really help the Frosty K because he's like, well, I'm sorry, I don't have any damage, so you're on your own, which is really, really bad synergy, but that has completely changed. So, Frost, Windwalker. Frost, arms TSG with a spear? Kind of an in parentheses question mark there. Frost Destro could come back. And any other comps that fall under this line of thinking. The AoE goes, AoE disruption, frequent on-demand damage. Not really a grinder comp per se. That's what Unholy is good at, and we'll get into that in a second. But more of I can go very quickly. Even Frosty K Ret could probably kill healers, but I'm not going to... And Frosty K Assass could probably do AoE goes with, you know, the AoE Shiv toolkit. But I'm not going to get too much into those things because the ones that I talked about were much better examples of this kind of playstyle and mentality. Boom. Let's bring up Unholy. So Unholy, like I alluded to multiple times already, is a sustain grinder spec. It has stackable Mortal Strike, hovering over that right now for you, which allows it and any other Mortal Strike spec to have 2 Mortal Strikes that activate at the exact same time. It is not that big because it can stack with anything, so it's only up to 15%. Or is it 18%? 18%. But it's 18% of the remaining healing on them. So it's like first they're reduced by the Mortal Strike effect, which is 25%, and then the remaining healing is absorbed. 18% of that is absorbed. But anyway, that is a huge difficulty for healers to deal with, right? That is just their healing numbers are, before dampening even kicks in, already much lower than they expect. Then you put on dampening on top of that, and it's like, how do my healing numbers match the damage that they're doing? Right? It's very difficult. So, Unholy loves comps, 1, with a Mortal Strike, and 2, with a lot of sustain, always accessible, constantly doing damage, grinder mentality output, right? So that was Fury, because Fury doesn't have really a go window. It generates all of its Fury, presses Rampage, puts on the Mortal Strike effect, and then just keeps going back and forth, slingshotting that Fury bar, which is, or the Rage bar, which is constantly giving it access to a big stacking Mortal Strike, which will stack with your Necrotic Wounds, and constant single target damage. And Unholy loves constant single target damage. So there's Fury. It would still play with Arms. Of course it would. Unholy Arms has been a fantastic comp multiple times in this game's history. But I gave Fury the nod specifically because Fury is designed for that single target grinder mentality, and that's what I said was the cornerstone of Unholy's playstyle. But you also have things like Hunter, because Hunter has fantastic CC and fantastic single target damage if you're playing with BM and the Mortal Strike, which is every single requirement that I said, right? If you stun trap a healer and you're both doing single target damage, and you get them very low, but now you have a stacking Mortal Strike on that DPS, and the healer comes out of CC and he tries to top him, but he can't, and then you have a silence out of that, a nice long range short cooldown silence. You don't need the stun perhaps because he can set up his own traps, which means you have an off DR CC extender, and then your priest can fear out of that. I mean, this is so difficult to deal with because already it's hard to heal through. You have stacking Mortal Strike, single target BM damage, single target Unholy damage. That's just a nightmare. It's just constant, never-ending, limitless pressure. But you also have all the CC that you have to deal with and all the different DRs, right? So Unholy likes the TSG with the Fury and possibly the Arms, of course, too. And then it loves the BM Hunter. It's also played with Shadow Priest in the past, so I'm going to go out a limb and say that comp is probably going to be overshadowed by much better comps this expansion, so I'm not leaning into Unholy Shadow Priest. But I am going to lean into Unholy Demon Hunter, because what do Demon Hunters do? Damage. All the time. Always. Unlike Windwalker, which really likes that gusto, that huge go. Like, just pull them all in. Let's do a big AoE go with Fist of Fury and Leg Sweep. DH is like, I like that, but I can also do damage all the rest of the time always, right? Its core rotation is just so much damage. It can get into meta just by pressing I-beam, right? It doesn't need setups as much as it needs constant nauseating pressure. And I've now said that 14 times for what Unholy brings to the table, so of course Demon Hunter likes that. So we have Unholy Demon Hunter being added to the collection, where you can still do the Grip Blind Chaos Nova, and that's great because Frosty DK doesn't have, or Unholy DK doesn't have Frosty DK's AoE stun, so now it gets one from Demon Hunter. And you can grip the healer in and swap to him with a Fell Eruption into Silence. That's another thing that they can do. But you can just win on straight PvE damage because you both cleave, you both AoE a bunch, you both have tons of single target, you have stacking Mortal Strike, blah, 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 blah. So, that is what the difference between Unholy and Frost is. Unholy is that grinder, single target, sustain, rot pressure, double Mortal Strike. Doesn't have its own AoE stun, so it doesn't quite have the setups that Frost has, but when it paired with somebody that can use that AoE go by itself, like Demon Hunter, or paired with somebody that just wants to keep the healer in Africa, CC them all day while doing single target damage like BM, Unholy does really well with that. Frost has the sickest cleaving strikes, D&D down, cleave, obliterate, Frostworm's Fury, and Remorseless Winter Stun AoE go, and can pair with people that just want to milk that as hard as possible, or that have other effects like Destrolock that CC off DR over and over, and make it impossible for the healer to ever get out of pseudo CC. And there you go. That is the answer to the question, Frost versus Unholy, to the best of ability that I possibly could do. Okay, now we're getting into some more specific questions. For all you Frost lovers again, if you need to skip this section, go to the timestamps below. We are talking dual wield versus two-hander. I've gotten this question so many times. So here is a two-handed weapon. You can equip it on Frost, but oh my god, look what happens when you start doing this. That's right, you can use both weapon types as Frost, and they do different things. They do different things because of the passive. Let's bring it up on the screen. Might of the Frozen Waste. Wielding a two-handed weapon increases obliterate damage by 30%, and your auto attack critical strikes always grant Killing Machine. Do not be alarmed. We've done, it used to be that dual wield just got more KM procs than two-handed still. From some slight experimentation so far, and I don't really know what's going on with this. It seems like they get nearly the exact same amount of Killing Machine procs, or maybe our sample size was not big enough. But Might of the Frozen Waste effectively says, do more obliterate damage with dual wield, or with two-hander. Then you have to sacrifice what dual wielding two weapons gives for you. So let's talk about the differences between them. So of course, obliterate is a huge chunk of your damage. One, you have multiple obliterate mods like this and Frigid Executioner, this. Then you can cleave obliterate with cleaving strikes right here. This obliterate hits up to 2 additional enemies while you remain in D&D, which also actually extends after D&D, which is a huge quality of life change. Then you have things like obliteration, which makes your off global abilities, Howling Blast and Frost Strike, generate a Killing Machine every single time during Pillar of Frost, which is your big damage button. And when your obliterate consumes Killing Machine, it now does frost damage and always crits. And when an ability crits, it does way more damage. When it does frost damage, it does way more damage because it scales with Razor Ice, other frost mods that you have, your mastery, and also it ignores armor. So all of a sudden, when a Killing Machine is available and your shiny obliterate button starts to glow, it is going to do so much more damage than all of your other obliterates would. So when this glows, it pops off. When it doesn't glow, not so much. And this is what makes obliterate that all-in, nuclear, high burst, super impactful, watch their health bars go down every time you press it button. And yes, it glows very shiny, so you won't be able to miss it. So yeah. That's a big thing to buff that yet again by 30%. So what does dual wield possibly have to try and keep up with that? Well, let me talk about it. First, dual wield does more auto attack damage. It does more white damage, which is because of its faster speed, but still has pretty decent weapon damage, and it just equates to more auto attack damage overall because you have two weapons. This synergizes with Smothering Offense, which gives you more auto attack damage overall, but this stacks with all your stacks of Icy Talons, and it buffs the stacks of Icy Talons to up to 5 times. This is the Icy Talons buff right here that gives you more attack speed and attack damage stacking up to 5 times. So your melee attacks are actually going to be a pretty big component of your damage. I already talked in the last section about how you're going to have way less mastery going into War Within because all of your secondary stats are going to go way down. And if you have less mastery, then that means white damage will be a higher component of your damage. So Dual wield gets that benefit. And if it's doing a lot more auto attack damage, well, then permafrost is actually just better too, because this is based entirely around your auto attack damage. And you can say, well, doesn't two-hander hit harder? Yes, but you're not talking about trying to get a big shield out of a permafrost swing. You're just talking about the overall healing that it does over a course of the match, because one auto attack swing is going to be hardly noticeable for permafrost. It's not like you're getting 200k power word shields on you when you press permafrost. Absolutely not. And you don't press it, it's passive. But permafrost is just better with dual wield. So you get a little bit more survivability and a little bit more white damage. But that's definitely not enough. So what else do you get? Well, there's an effect in DK called rune forging. And rune forging allows you to have your own specific DK enchants, and they're all way, way better than regular enchants. Fallen Crusader is the go-to. It gives you a huge strength proc, which is just more damage, and a heal, which is nice because every time it procs, it gives you a little chunk of healing. But there's another one that has recently been able to be ran on one-handed weapons, which is called Rune of the Stone Skin Gargoyle. And this gives you permanent strength, permanent stamina, and permanent armor. So in addition to having this additional rune forge for extra damage, because that's what strength is, it is also an extra rune forge for additional survivability. And since dual wield really wants to stay in for all that auto attack damage and sustain and pressure outside of goes, having extra survivability perfectly works into what dual wield wants to do. So Rune of the Stone Skin Gargoyle is nice to give dual wield start catching up in damage to the big obliterate buff of two-hander, but it also gives you survivability that you desperately need. That is more stamina, more armor, more survivability, because all of your things like AMS and Death Strike all benefit from how high your stamina is. So you get that, a third rune forge, which, by the way, is then buffed by Unholy Bond. And what do I mean a third rune forge? It looked like you only have two. Well, actually, in Frost's toolkit, you have talents like Avalanche. Casting Howling Blast with Rime active causes jagged icicles to fall on enemies nearby your target, applying Razor Ice. What is Razor Ice? That is another rune forge that you have access to. I'll even pull it up for players that are new to the game, even though I'm talking so fast they probably can't keep up with me. But Rune of Razor Ice stacks a frost damage debuff up to 5 times on the target. 5 times 3% is 15%. But it's actually more than that because of Unholy Bond. So it's up to 18% extra frost damage. And yes, this is one of those frost mods that you have that makes those big obliterates hit so hard. So Unholy Bond, triple rune forge is the idea, because you have Razor Ice from Avalanche, Razor Ice from Glacial Advance, which also applies Razor Ice. And then you have the two that you put on your weapons, Rune of the Stone Skin Gargoyle and Rune of the Fallen Crusader. But the only one that dual wield gets that two-hander doesn't is Rune of the Stone Skin Gargoyle, and that's what I mean by triple rune forge on Holy Bond. Whew! So those are two things that dual wield gets, but it actually gets a few more. One, it gets more value from Icy Death Torrent. Icy Death Torrent scales in damage only with your attack power. And attack power is normalized from your weapon types. So it's not that two-hander with its big chunky two-handed weapon gets any more attack power. In fact, dual wield actually gets more attack power because it has the Stone Skin Gargoyle enchant, which gives it strength, and strength directly translates to attack power. So Icy Death Torrent is actually just more damage and way more access with dual wield, because you're attacking faster, which means you're going to get more auto attack critical strikes than if you were attacking much slower. So Icy Death Torrent is benefited by dual wield. But then there's another one. Long Winter. When Pillar of Frost is active, your auto attacks critical strikes increase the duration of Pillar by 2 seconds up to a maximum of 6. This is clearly and far and away more applicable with dual wield, because you need 3 auto attack crits during Pillar to get the full 6 seconds. If you don't get those 3 auto attack crits, you do not get the full duration of this talent increase. And if you don't have enough crit to get it as two-hander, that means a lot of your pillars will not be the full 18 seconds. But with dual wield, you attack so much faster, you need a lot less crit to benefit from this. Now, I've had some people say they've had no problem getting Long Winter as two-hander. I'm pretty sure they're talking about the crit amounts we can get with all the crazy secondary stats we have access to now. Right now, if I wanted to, I could put all my mastery into crit and have 40% crit if I wanted to. But you cannot do that at the beginning of the new expansion. So I don't know how much crit we're going to have access to with the War Within gearing. But if it is not that much, there is a huge chance that two-hander cannot fully access Long Winter, and that is a big problem because this talent is fantastic. Whew. There's one more thing that it does. I know it felt like I was over there, but there's actually one more thing that it does. If you don't want to play the triple Runeforge Endless Winter build that I've talked about on my pre-patch guide, go check it out on my channel. You can actually play Razor Ice as your second Runeforge, put it on there, and then play Shattering Blade. Shattering Blade will consume all that Razor Ice, dropping your stacks back down to 0, which is huge damage nerf for you, but for a massive Frost Strike hit, and that is very, very bursty, and burst wins in PvP because it is more difficult to deal with when your health bar is slingshotting down faster than you can keep up with. So of course that is a good build. And dual wield actually benefits this too. And the reason why is because the faster you attack, the faster you apply Razor Ice, and the faster you apply Razor Ice, the faster you can get access to Shattering Blade. So it keeps that engine churning because you are getting to 5 stacks, spending them for a huge Frost Strike, and getting back there faster. So dual wield benefits from that. Oh, whoop, there's one more thing that dual wield benefits from. It's Deathbringer, because Deathbringer requires Reaper's Mark stacks. To get high value from this is the hero talent. Go check it out on Wahad Hero Talent Calculator. But the bottom line is Reaper's Mark stacks is the name of the game for Deathbringer. And as always, dual wield applies them faster, getting more value out of that hero talent. So I know it looks like I was a huge, huge proponent for dual wield. And that's because I am. But there is something that I said at the beginning of all of this crazy rambling that will answer your question directly. Two-hander gets obliterate damage and cleaving strikes value. And dual wield gets all that other stuff I just spent 5 to 10 minutes talking about. So what's the difference between dual wield and two-handed? Two-handed has fantastic burst and really good setups, because setups mean grip, blind, death and decay, AoE stun. Cleave, obliterate, cleave, obliterate, cleave, obliterate. Dual wield has more survivability and self-sustain, and sustain damage, which means if you are playing something that wants to be able to chunk damage in between goes, stay in, and grind people out of cooldowns, much akin to like how Unholy would, but while still retaining the Frost style of just big 45-second goes, you could play dual wield. If you want to all-in somebody still, and you don't care about the damage in between, you just want that 45-second D&D cleave window to be as strong as possible, play two-hander. You will lose all of the things that I talked about, but there are certain playstyles and comps where that just doesn't matter because your all-in go is too strong for people to deal with. Another question answered. Okay. Next timestamp. What about blood? What about blood? What about blood? What even about blood? I don't know. What about it? Blood, I'm going to be talking about during this expansion. And there's a reason specifically why. Battleground Blitz. Battlegrounds, tanks kind of fit in a little bit better. In solo shuffle, you could play Blood. It would just be lower than Frost and Unholy. It was a little frustrating to play because you could set up these crazy goes, but your own personal damage was not that bursty or that spiky to actually get huge benefit out of them. You could play it in 3s or 2s, but you were really playing it to be extremely annoying, gripping people off your healer or your ranged DPS and constantly peeling the entire time while being immortal. Your win condition was being as disruptive and annoying as possible. And that, for some people, is fun. And as a result, I eventually will make some content with Blood and talk about how well it can peel, because it can peel insanely well. That's just true. Double grip, short cooldown with chains, that's just fantastic peels. And since they can't swap to you, the grip becomes much better of a peel on Blood than Frost and Unholy. That is what makes those peels so destructive, because you're like, Frost and Unholy have double grip. Why can't they just be like this? Because you just go Frost or Unholy, especially Frost last expansion. I mean, if a Frost EK grips you to them, you would kill them. But Blood is a tank, obviously, and its self-healing is tremendous, and its health pool is so high. So when a Blood DK gripped you on a shorter cooldown, because Blood has a shorter cooldown grip, you couldn't just swap to them. You kind of had to just keep running away, but then they would grip you back again. And you're like, okay, well, this time I could run away, and then they would just grip you back again. And you're like, what do I do, right? That is how Blood played, and yes, it was very disruptive, and yes, it was very annoying, and yes, it was kind of annoying to play, because after a while, how many times could you press Death Grip without getting bored? But But Battleground Blitz does open some scenarios where you could play this class in a different way. It does have a lot of AoE damage, and it really does well with the Sanlin. The Sanlin Vampiric Strike hero talent setup, where you have a lot of single target and AoE patty damage. You're not going to be as bursty as the other two DK specs because you're a tank, but being able to have some of the other two specs in your spec because of hero talents being a hybridization of both, it gives you a lot of juice. And juice and pressure overall AoE damage in a BG setting is really big because sure, maybe single targeting one guy down you're not the best at, but applying a damage to a whole group of people while disrupting them very drastically, you are very good at. And that will make healers struggle to keep up with your damage, but also everybody else on your team's damage while you're applying this extra AoE pressure and disrupting them at the same time. And what I mean by disruption is effectively just this. If you can grip all the healers into a big pile, now they're in a big pile of people, which means they're going to be affected by AoE CC, pseudo CC, like short stuns and silences. You have your own silence. You have kicks. You have blinds. Blinds, maybe they break. Doesn't matter because it stopped that cast from them. It stopped that global from them. Then you kick them. Then you, or stomp them if you're a cow. Then you stun them. Then, or you silence them depending on which one you're running. Then you grip them back in again, and the grip stops their cast and pulls them back into the pile. Okay, well now they have to run out of the pile. Okay, well now you limb grip them. Okay, now you grip them again, right? So you're doing all of this while being a terrible swap target, while having a decent amount of extra damage because of the Sanlin Unholy hybridization you've got going on from hero talents, while having some decent peels for your team, because every time you pull people together, that means they're doing less to you. You have effects like Vestigial Shell, which puts huge AMSs on other people and reduces their incoming harmful magical effects. You have Spell Warden, which may be fixed to work with Vestigial Shell, but is actually probably the better of the two because you can put a huge AMS on a healer and prevent all incoming CC and give them a big shield. You can even run things like Death Chain, which now, let me hover over this because a lot of people don't play Blood, so they probably don't even know what this does. All damage taken by 3 people in a chain is shared by the other person. So in a cleave situation, this is compounding value where they're all just taking all of each other's damage and all the damage they're all taking by themselves all at the same time. You'll see Death Chain, if used properly in a big pile of AoE go and a limb and an AoE stun, be your top damage because of all the damage they're taking is now taken by the other people. Yeah, okay, it's crazy. It's crazy in a BG setting. So Battleground Blitz enables Blood to be effectively a immortal version of Frost and Unholy with shorter cooldowns on its disruptive effects. Will it have quite as much burst? No. Should you be able to pad quite as hard as Unholy? No, unless you're just better than that player. But your access to damage and your difficulty of people ever dealing with you is so high that I could see Blood team fight be a thing. Now there's another thing you could do with Blood, which is kidnap people with Death Grip like I was talking about at the beginning. I'm not going to talk about this because it's dumb. Okay, moving on. All right, so the finality here is I wanted to go over some brief, this is very brief, add-ons that I would recommend getting used to for War Within, and some macros that I would recommend just figuring out for War Within. And the reason for this is because I'll probably make a big like beginner's guide to DK again in War Within and go over my entire add-on package, maybe my weak aura package, all this stuff. But I just wanted you to get familiarized with these add-ons, so while you're doing nothing in pre-patch, you can kind of set them up and play around with them for yourself. So add-ons that I use and heavily recommend: Battleground Enemies, because BG Blitz is a thing now. Just grab this. It is a very good, useful frames, like boop, 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 boop. There's the enemy team, boop, 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 boop. There's your team. You can see what's on them, where they are, what their health pools are like, what their classes are. Battleground Enemies, great for that. You can also target them on the Battleground Enemies to know where they are by, it'll target them on the screen when you click them on the frame. Battleground enemy is great. Battleground blitz tool. Big debuffs is just great for everything. It shows things like their cooldowns, like their offensive or defensive cooldowns. So you can be like, oh, that was pain sup on this guy. Let me swap to a different guy so I'm not doing 40% less damage. Big debuff, super good. This one I'm just going to say, when people ask me, hey, what do you use to make your secondary stats have all these different options so you can play around and test things, like knowing how much your haste impacts your global cooldown. That's a really cool one. That is called Deja Character Stats. Details is the meter. Meters are just way too good. You can check interrupts, CCs. You can check which of your kicks landed. You can check how much damage you're doing, but also what your damage profile looks like. So if you made any talent choices, you wanted to see how much of a portion of your damage it is. We were talking about death chain before. If you wanted to see if your death chains were really good, you can hover over your details damage meter and it'll show you the breakdown of what your damage looks like. If death chain was at the top, you did a great job. If it was near the bottom, you probably missed up your goes. So details very good for that and so much more. Omni CD shows you what your teammates have. Party cooldown tracker says it right there. So if you're like, oh my God, I'm scared, but then you see your teammate has a pain sup left, as long as they don't hate your guts, you can say, I just got a death strike a few times, he'll get out of CC and then he'll pain sup me. And if that happens, then he gets out of polymorph and then pain sups you. Thank God you didn't panic. You lived to see another day. Omni CD is just really useful for knowing what your teammates have access to and what you need to do if you need to peel for them or use something on your own because your teammate's out of everything. If they have no pain sups and you were sitting on AMS and IBF, then maybe you should think about using those things. S Arena needs an update. As of the recent, what is it, 10.11.2, we've gone so far. I'm so old, it's so crazy. But yeah, it just needs an update. It will get one. But it is an arena. Well, it says it right there on the screen. Arena frames. You can see DRs. You can target them. It's just really good. It's like the BG enemies of Arena. Very, very important, especially just to see DRs, honestly. So you know when your stun is going to be halved by the first DR, quartered by the second DR, or fully immune, right? If you use a stun on somebody that's already been stunned 3 times, your stun is now going to do absolutely nothing. It will be fully immune, and you'll be like, whoa, what did he do? Did he cheat? My stun didn't work. No, he was fully DR'd. You can't just stun somebody over and over and over and over again, or the game would have no meaning. Weak auras is the final tool, and this one takes way too long to explain. It's pretty much as everything under the sun. It pulls up. It can do sound notifications or visual notifications. You can put on icons. You can put on pretty colored text for when something happens during the game. And when I say something, that's pretty vague. I do mean something. It could be anything. It could be something from your unholy pet has died. And you're like, it tells you to summon it because you're like, oh crap, I'm not paying attention to my unholy pet and it's dead, so I lost a lot of damage, right? It can be a mage popped combustion. And now it shows combustion on the screen until combustion is down. It's not just like one brief instant where if you miss it, if you blink, you miss it. There's just combustion on the screen right here. And be like, okay, well, I should probably use anti-magic zone, right? I should probably put one of these bad boys down. Weak auras can do almost anything. Anything that you can think of as an interaction between World of Warcraft and its players, you can be notified of that in some way. So, of course, that is going to require its own video, as this one has already gone for 16,000 hours, I think. I think I'm on hour 16,422. So, really got to wrap things up. So there's some brief add-ons discussion on what I use and what you should get familiarized with. And again, I will go into much more detail when the new expansion drops in my beginner's guide video. And finally, we have some macro ideas that you'll want to play around with. This one's really important. Death Coil self-healing is actually still really big. And while runic power is not as easy to access as it was in Dragonflight, there will be times where maybe an AMS gives you a huge chunk of runic power, and then you can just spam Death Coil on yourself to heal. So what that means is you have this ability, Death Coil, and it heals undead targets. And when you press Lichborn, what did I say earlier in the race guide? If you were here for that, it turns you into an undead. And if you can heal undead targets and make yourself an undead target, then that means you can heal yourself. So /cast bracket target equals me bracket Death Coil, and that will just heal yourself with Death Coil, and it can be huge, especially if you have a lot of strength modifiers, because Death Coil's damage and healing scales up with strength modifiers. So that's something you can do. You have things like burst macros, where you can /cast Pillar of Frost, /cast your trinket if you're running double damage trinket. So that's like the badge is the on-use trinket. So then this would be followed up, or rather preceded by whatever season it was. So maybe it would be like, there's various seasons of Dragonfight. There was Crimson, Obsidian, Verdant, Gladiator's Badge of Ferocity. So you would just replace that whatever new season is coming out in the War Within. I had Raised Dead on there because they finally made it so he doesn't pet stun early into the expansion. So you could just throw him in as free damage. You could also do things like this. Watch this. Boom. I just made the macro for you. / cast Blood Fury. You can see how easy it is to type that in. And now your Orc Racial. That's what the Orc Racial is. Or Troll Racial, for anybody who wants to try something crazy, / cast Berserking. And that's how you make a damaging macro. You can do that with Unholy, which I had macro to Empower Rune Weapon, which it no longer has. So you can see that's a Dragonflight specific one. Dancing Rune Weapon, you can do that sort of thing. This was my Spell Warden macro. Again, just targeting stuff. / cast target equals. This was the healer of that solo shuffle, anti-magic shell. So every time I pressed AMS with that macro, which I don't use right now because I haven't played Blood in many a fortnight, you would just use AMS on the healer with Spell Warden instead of on yourself and give them a huge shield. And then you have things like Arena 1 and Arena 2 for Death Grip. So if you cast Death Grip and you want to make sure it's a specific guy, like you want to always grip the healer in, you can see which version, which placement on the nameplates is a healer the top. That means he's Arena 1. So you would do this. There, did it. And I believe that you're capable of doing that too. I deleted a 3 and replaced it with a 1 / cast target equals Arena 1 Death Grip, and now you can grip the healer in every time. And then of course there's things like pet commands, leap and gnaw, so you can use them manually / cast gnaw and / cast leap. Modifiers are things that allow you to target your focus or target an arena target when you press that button. In this case, it's a modifier shift and a modifier control you can use. So shift is there and control is control. You can pause the video at any time while I have those macros on the screen and copy them for yourself. And that, my friends, is it. DK, information that you may need going into War Within. If you have any questions that I didn't answer, I will make a part 2 of this dang thing, and I will answer them then. I really hope this helped. I know there were a lot of words. You could actually watch it back in slow motion and make it twice as long if you wanted to. That would be a great way to self-torture. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.